Welcome back to Small Caps, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kerry Stevenson, and I'm delighted to bring back Doug Casey. Doug Casey writes Doug Casey's Take on YouTube. He also has internationalman.com. And before I start chatting with Doug, we chatted 2 months ago, got a lot of views on that. A lot of people asking me to bring back Doug Casey for his deep thinking and his wise words on what the heck is going on in the economy. But before I get started with Doug, to all of you that are listening, I would say to you, stop watching the streaming services garbage and become a subscriber to internationalman.com. There's so much good information on there, so many really good articles that I want you to read, because I think it's time that people out there, you fed your minds with articles and information which helps you to understand navigating the different world that we find ourselves in and will continue to find ourselves in. Doug, welcome back to Small Caps. Great to see you.
Well, it's nice to see you, Kerry, and I almost feel like I'm with you there in Australia, although in fact, I'm on the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia in the US at the moment. Last time we spoke, I think I was in Uruguay, wasn't I?
You were, yes.
Yes.
And someone said to me, what's it like in Uruguay, and why, why do you think Uruguay will be spared from chaos?
Well, the reason I think Uruguay will be reasonably spared from the coming chaos is because it's a small country, 4 million people. It's an agricultural country, which is good. It has a ritzy beach resort, Punta del Este, so it maintains an international flavor. It's not just a backward little farm country. And interestingly, it is the only country in South America right now that has a reasonable government, a reasonable president. All over Latin America, they're electing not just leftists, they're electing hardcore communists everywhere. And in October, Brazil is going to have an election, and they're going to do the same thing. They're going to re-elect Lula, a hardcore communist who did some jail time, and he's out, and they're going to re-elect him. So there's really no hope in the continent, except
so how does Uruguay stay? How does this little country stay with a president that is different?
Yeah, how does it do it indeed? It's just a mellow place. And I can't put my finger on why. It's that most of the people are involved in farming. I mean, it's big. A lot of them are government employees too, I've got to say. But farming and tourism and forestry and government. Why is that the case with Uruguay? Gee, I don't know, because during the 70s, they had left-wing guerrillas and they had a military government, killed about 500 people. Now that's small potatoes as government-sponsored murders in South America go, but it's only got 4 million people. And I don't know, this is a mystery that I'm going to have to delve into a little bit more. But everything can change in South America with one election. In fact, everything can change anywhere with one election. As Americans found when they elected the Bidenistas 2 years ago. I mean, the people that the Americans elected when they kicked out Trump, these are the same people psychologically and philosophically as the Bolsheviks in Russia in 1917 or the Jacobins in France in 1792. So that anything can happen anywhere because the world is increasingly an unstable place in every way, economically, financially, politically, socially, militarily. So we're heading into a time that is not going to be dissimilar from what happened in the 1930s and then, God forbid, the 1940s.
So you're saying we're heading towards depression and then ultimately potentially a global war, but it might not be like a World War II. It could be more like a cyber war or a biological warfare.
Yeah, that's my belief. I mean, nuclear weapons are certainly as much of a problem as they've ever been, but the real action is going to be in cyber warfare, because the whole world runs on computers. Everything runs on computers.
Yeah.
Utilities, the financial system, everything. And you shut down computers, you're asking for total chaos. Everything from gas stations won't be able to pump gas, bills won't get paid. I mean, that would be a bloodless war, but only bloodless for 2 days, because chaos breaks out after people miss 6 meals. So, yeah, cyber war is going to be part of it. Biological war is definitely going to be part of it, because every major country in the world, and probably a bunch of minor ones, have active bio-warfare labs, because biological warfare has got lots of advantages. You can strike with plausible deniability. You can insulate and inoculate your own population, maybe along racial lines. It's silent, it's quick, it's deadly. Yeah, we're going to have a bio-war element to this. Of course, the nuclear war will still be there. Now, this is scary times we're heading into. And I've always been of the opinion that anything that can happen probably will happen. It's just a question of time and the law of large numbers. So I hate to come up with such a gloomy conclusion, because don't forget, I endorse Ray Kurzweil's concept of the singularity, where he says in a generation at most, nanotechnology and space exploration and robotics and artificial intelligence will totally transform the nature of life for the better. So take your choice.
Do you think it's interesting? It's a bit doom and gloom at the moment, Doug. We've been down this path historically before, but this time, do you think people will see the writing on the wall and be able to take a step back and say, and just be a little bit more sensible? Or do you think we never learn?
No, I'd like to believe they will, but no, I think the average guy is basically sensible. But look what happened recently in Australia, where the city, in fact, the whole state of Victoria, but really Melbourne itself, was locked down tighter than a drum, more than any other city on the planet. And people did what they were told in a slavish way, even though they certainly after a little while recognized that not only was COVID just a variety of flu, frankly, and no more deadly, with the average age of descendants about age 80, but they did what they were told for 2 years. Rolled over on their backs and wet themselves like whipped dogs. And this has been true all over the world. So there
was a lot of fear. I wanted to say, people didn't understand COVID. And therefore, when they locked up Melbourne, that people felt that the government was looking after their best interests because they didn't understand it. And therefore, well, if we all stay away from each other and we all do, stay in our safe little cave, everything will be okay. What do you say to that?
I'd say that it's proof that the average person doesn't think very clearly, because one thing about viruses is that they go viral, and a gauze mask over your mouth is not going to stop a submicroscopic thing from circulating in the air. So they didn't think that out. And they were entirely too trusting with the powers that be in the government. And this is that's their first mistake, because, and I think I mentioned this in our last interview, but I'll say it again because it bears repeating probably daily. It's that there are two kinds of people in the world. People that like to control the material universe, sticks and stones and machines and stuff like that. And there are people that like to control other people. And it's the kind of people that like to control other people that are drawn to government, that groove on it, that grow with it. It's like this dangerous psychopath who's the premier of Victoria, of Dan something or other. I mean, I've watched some speeches by this guy, and he's slick, and he says, this is for your own benefit. He looks sincere and honest and calm. He's a dangerous criminal. And evidence of that is what he's done over the last 2 years, locking down the place, using the police to control their fellow citizens. I mean, it's perfectly horrible. And he's not the only one. There's lots of them everywhere. People that get into politics, if they aren't corrupt when they get into politics, they will be corrupt very, very shortly. Power corrupts.
Why do you think it was so dangerous to shut it down for a couple of years? Because there are those people that would say he did it for our own health and well-being. Why? What? And did it have that much of an effect? They're all back to normal now.
Yeah. Well, I hate people that pretend to do things for my own good. Okay. I believe in individual agency.
Yeah.
And your health is something that is your responsibility, not the government's responsibility, quite frankly. And the amount of damage that these people cause in accruing more power to themselves, destroying businesses, destroying lives, locking people in their apartments so that the suicide rate went way up, forcing people to have injections of a vaccine, I guess it is. Some people say it's not really. That there's lots of anecdotal evidence that it's actually quite dangerous. It certainly hasn't been tested and proven over the time that things that you put in your body.
Yeah, we don't want to go down this. We don't want to go down this road too far because we'll get
banned. That's right. And this is a stock show. But see, what concerns me is that the stock market is part of the economy as a whole, and the economy is part of civilization as a whole. And I'm afraid, because of the way that the world is basically turning towards collectivism, statism, socialism, neo-Marxism, other isms of that type, it's compromising civilization itself, compromising the culture. It'll compromise the economy. And it does relate to the stock market, actually, because all this ties together.
Tie it together for us and help us to understand, because right now, here in Australia, as I speak to you, just yesterday, the RBA raised the rates here by 0.5%. And I want to get into taxation in a minute, but let's just start with interest rates. Here in Australia, there is a degree of concern about the rising interest rates. But having said that, they've been artificially low for a very long time. The stock market, since you and I last spoke 2 months ago, has shed itself by quite a few points, and a lot of people are hurting. Do you think that will continue?
Well, governments all over the world have orchestrated artificially low interest rates. They've done that a number of ways. And when interest rates are low, that makes people think, gee, it's not worthwhile saving, but it is worthwhile borrowing.
Yeah.
And what is borrowing all about? It's about mortgaging yourself in the future to pay off that loan, or borrowing, consuming somebody else's capital that they put aside in the past to consume now. It drives up asset prices, and high asset prices make people think they're richer than they really are. So governments manipulating interest rates is always a disaster, even if for the short run, it can put you in a fool's paradise. But in the long run, which has arrived incidentally, it gives you a very real disaster. And that's where we are right now. So look, the stock markets of the world have done really, really well for the last couple of generations. And a lot of it's been driven by phony money, fiat money, artificial credit, created out of nowhere by governments for political reasons. And I'm afraid we're going to have a comeuppance. And that will mean lots of bankruptcies, individual bankruptcies, corporate bankruptcies, pension funds that go under because their assets crash. Look, right now, prices are rising in most Western countries at 10 to 15% per year.
Yep.
Everything costs 10 to 15% more than it did at this time last year, being conservative. Now, how are you being compensated by that? 1%, 1.5%, 2%, or whatever like that. It's like a guaranteed loss of 8, 10, 15% per year. So where are you going to hide? Can't go in the stock market. Stock markets are still grossly overpriced. I'm not saying that there won't be a big bounce. I'm just saying that they still have a long way to fall. Can't go into the bond market. I mean, bonds are a triple threat to your wealth. You've got the inflation risk.
Why are bonds a triple threat?
Triple threat for 3 reasons. Number one is inflation, okay? The dollars those bonds are denominated in are losing value at the rate of 10 to 15% per year right now. So that's going in. Number 2 is the interest rate risk. Your bonds are what, 2, 3, 4%, whatever they are. But interest rates are probably going to go way above the current rate of inflation. I think they're headed back to 8, 10, 15% or more. And the current value of a bond fluctuates inversely with interest rates. So that's the second risk. And the third thing is the default risk. Now, of course, your government bond won't default because they'll just print up more money to pay it off. But corporations can default, in which case you get part or perhaps zero of what you put. So bonds are a triple threat to your financial well-being. You should sell your bonds tomorrow morning. I think I said exactly those words the last time we spoke a couple of months ago. I'm not sure how many people follow that advice. It was good advice.
Oh, absolutely. So you recently, because we're talking about inflation and we're talking about taxes and interest rates, you recently put an article out on internationalman.com about the fact that we're slightly up from slavery. And I'd like to just quote, because one of the things you said was, well, in the article, Mark Skousen, the economist and author, pointed out that taxation is the price we pay for failing to build a civilized society. The higher the tax level, the greater the failure. A centrally planned totalitarian state is a complete failure of civilization, while a totally voluntary society is the ultimate success. And what you said in this article is taxes are destroyers of civilization and society. And the reason I bring that up is governments are going to have to start increasing taxes from where I'm looking at it. What's your take?
Sure, because governments are all over the world are indebted. And if they're going to pay off those debts, there's 2 ways they can do it, either by printing up more currency, which is devastating to the average person, makes it impossible and not worthwhile for the average person to save or get ahead. So inflation is actually the worst kind of tax. But direct taxes take what's left. Look, we have to look at this from an ethical point of view. And taxes are indistinguishable for theft. Why do I say that? Because when you look up the definition of theft in the dictionary, it's going to say something like to take someone's property from him without their consent, or words to that effect. In no dictionary definition does it say, parentheses, unless you're the government, then it's not theft anymore, close parens. And it's a moral issue. And the problem with government as an entity, I'm not talking about, let's get our politicians in there, they're better than the other politicians. it's in with the new boss, out with the old boss, like the rock and roll song. It's pointless. It's the process itself. And politics is about coercion. It's about, let me get into a position where I can impose my ideas on everybody else, whether they like it or not. And they say, well, no, we live in a democracy where it's majority rule. Well, first of all, that's nonsense, because all the majority does is elect the kind of venal person that wants to be a politician. And once he's in office, he lies to you and then does what he wants. Democracy isn't, even if it was a perfect democracy, it's really just mob rule dressed up in a coat and tie, where 51% of the country or city or whatever it is can hold a gun to the other 49% and tell them what to do. Now, people say, well, they don't really do that. But as we've seen during the recent lockdowns and all that, yes, they'll do that and much more. And they'll make you pay taxes up to 50% of your income, maybe more, maybe much more. And if you don't, they will do bad things to you, put you in jail or worse. Mm-hmm. So people don't seem to understand. They think the government is their friend. They think it's a cornucopia. They think it's something that can cure all ills, but it's not. The government is, in fact, your biggest enemy. Everybody says, well, Vladimir Putin's our biggest enemy today. Well, actually, no, he's not. Vladimir Putin is about zero threat to me, but the United States government is much closer to me and does lots of bad things to me all the time, which Putin does not do. And I don't believe that the government is defending me from Putin. Well, for one reason, because Russia itself is nothing but as I describe it, a gasoline station in the middle of a wheat field with an attached gun store. And that's all there is to it. It's a backward third world country. So the main danger I have is the US government. And the main danger you have is the Australian government, quite frankly.
Why is that? Because I want to know what's the alternative. Because if you're saying that governments are not the answer and that if we didn't have structure, surely there would be chaos.
Listen, I am not an advocate of chaos, okay? And I'm not an advocate of a society without structure.
Okay.
What actually is the case is society structures itself automatically. All the buildings in our cities, they weren't built by governments. Those restaurants, those stores, those shops, automobile dealerships, automobile factories, government didn't build any of these things. The only useful purpose the government should serve is to protect you from coercion, since government is kind of institutionalized coercion, comes out of the barrel of a gun, as Mao said. So what does that mean a government should do? It should protect you from coercion inside the country, which implies a police force. Mm-hmm. Protect you from coercion outside the country, which implies an army.
Yep.
And allow you to adjudicate disputes without resorting to coercion, which implies a court system. And it should do absolutely nothing else. Everything else will be done by society itself. And when government gets involved in doing anything other than what I just mentioned, gets involved in the work of society, it works to destroy society. It used to be in the old days when someone was down and out, well, a church group or a beneficial organization would look at him and monitor him carefully so he didn't become a 3-generation dole recipient, okay? But since the government took it over, well, now we have a class of professional welfare bums. And this is true of absolutely everything where government gets involved in. So I'm against the institution, and getting a good politician, quote unquote, there is not going to solve the problem. You've got to pull out the agencies and programs and the rest of it, pull them out by the roots and sow Agent Orange in the ground where they grew. I'm serious.
Right. But if you do that, what's the alternative? Are you saying that, so for example, here in Australia, there's a lot of taxes, government money, taxes, being spent on large infrastructure projects, which they say employs people, creates a productivity, creates a better economy. And so while we're going through this little bit of pain, we'll just keep pumping money into infrastructure projects. Is that the solution?
No, it's not a solution. It's misallocating capital. I don't know where the people themselves would rather see that money go. Perhaps if all the roads were privatized, which they should be, incidentally, everything should be privatized. Everything should be privately owned, and everything should be run for profit. It's
right.
That simple. Nothing should be subsidized, and nothing should be taxed. It wouldn't be necessary to tax everything if everything sustained itself. And if it can't sustain itself, that shows that there's no demand for it. Not enough people want it at a price they're willing to pay to justify its existence.
Because we currently, I think globally, there's a lot of subsidies for alternative energies. And before you all out there say, I'm anti-renewables, I'm not. I'm actually looking at this as an energy crisis we're going through and saying, how do we balance it? But Doug, to your point, the subsidies for renewables have distorted whether they are a good source of energy. What have you been looking into that at all?
Yes, the economics for renewables are extremely hard to determine because there are so many subsidies and direct and indirect. It makes it very hard to do an economic calculation. And if you can't do that, you can't tell for sure whether wealth is being created or destroyed. And that's apart from the argument that trying to run a large industrial-sized economy on wind and sun really doesn't make an awful lot of sense. Now, I'm not opposed to these things. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there are certainly certain situations where the sun shines a lot, it's cheap, great, or the wind blows a lot, isolated areas. That's for the market to decide. But trying to convert the world to green is not only wasting huge amounts of capital uneconomically, which is making the world poorer, but at some point we might find that there's just not enough electricity to do anything. And people say, well, we're gonna go to electronic vehicles. That'll cure the pollution problems and all that. Well, where's the electricity going to come from? Of course, when it gets down to mass power, the safest, the cleanest, and the cheapest form of mass power generation is unquestionably nuclear power. But it's such a political football that it's a real problem. I mean, sometimes it makes me despair when I read ancient history, and it's actually kind of a hobby of mine, ancient history. It's that I ask myself, is it possible that we could go into a dark age the way the Romans did after the 4th or 5th century? I'd say yes, absolutely, because there was a dark age in the Eastern Mediterranean before that, in the 12th century BC. So it just seems that perhaps, and human civilization itself is really just a babe. I mean, it only started, 5,000 years ago?
Yeah.
You can argue when, but it's collapsed at least twice since then. Are we coming up to a third collapse? Because, there's people like these World Economic Forum types run by Klaus Schwab. A number of them have said numerous times that things of the nature of the ideal number of people on the planet is about 500 million. In other words, down about 90 or 95% from where we are. And, all these useless mouths out there can disappear and stop, making our visits to St. Mark's Square in Venice inconvenient. There's all kinds of funny things that could happen out there in the world today. Dark age, possible, not predicting it. I'm just saying that anything that you can imagine is probably possible.
You mentioned the World Economic Forum. Why do we have it? What use is it? And how are they helping the planet?
Well, it's not just the World Economic Forum. You've got an older group called the Bilderbergers that get together and meet, same kind of people. There's another group that I went to. I was invited to, God knows why. Same people, Kissinger and the rest of them all talking, blah, blah. You've got the Council on Foreign Relations. You've got that group that meets in the tall timber in California. What the hell is that called? There's a bunch of the rich and the powerful like to get together with each other and try to decide how all of us little people should be organized and told what to do for our own benefit. It's probably just a psychological fault in the human animal. And the people that are especially smart and rich think that, well, I should control everything. I'm smarter than those other people. I'm richer. I should organize them. It's just a fault of the human animal.
But you're smart. You're not exactly poor. Why doesn't Doug Casey try and stand up and I guess, change things a little bit?
Well, what I do is, first of all, I don't want to control anybody else's life, and I don't want anybody else to control my life. It's really pretty simple from that point of view. And I wish everybody felt that way, but
yes,
they don't. So many people have a busybody mentality. You do this, you do that. It's so I don't know how we get away from that, frankly. And what do I do personally? Other than looking out for myself and my family and my friends, okay, charity begins at home. I like to talk about these things, such as we're doing right now, and perhaps a few people will listen and say, that might be worth looking into. Let me investigate that a little bit more. And I'd like to change the way people think, hopefully, so that more people in general, just decide, you know what, live and let live. Don't harm anybody else. Just live and let live, instead of trying to be a busybody, which is what politics encourages. Go out and vote and change the world by coercing other people. Horrible way to run a society, but it's the way societies are typically run.
Yeah, and we are looking at, there's a lot of that going on at the moment in the coercion, etc. But let's just move the conversation a little bit, Doug, into the fact that right now there's a lot of nervousness in the market. As you said before, earlier in this conversation, the interest rates you suspect will be going further up, back into what we were potentially in the early 90s. How do we manage during these times of massive uncertainty and potentially fear, where people are watching their wealth not disintegrate, but certainly is not as strong as it used to be?
Yeah, where can you run and hide? Let's look at the alternatives. You can stay in cash. Okay, maybe it's better to lose 5 or 10% per year, but still have the cash, assuming your bank gives it to you, which is another problem. Banks treat the money that you deposit with them today as kind of their money, not your money. And it can be hard even getting your money out of a bank these days. You can go into the stock market, but just as we've had a 40-year bull market, in many ways driven by artificial credit creation, I think we could have a long and nasty bear market. So I don't like that. Bonds, that's a kiss of death, so stay out of there. What about real estate? It's been very good to almost everybody for a long time.
Yeah.
The problem with real estate in most of the Western world is it's built on a foundation of debt. It's all borrowed money. Everybody, not everybody, most people have a mortgage on their house, and that includes commercial buildings and everything else. It's all built on debt. But as interest rates rise, it'll become less possible to build or to buy. And as interest rates go up, which they will, the price of a house fluctuates inversely with it. I mean, I could buy $1 billion house if I had no interest rates and the mortgage extended for 1 million years. I could live in $1 billion house. Okay, but if I'm paying 15% over 10 years, oh, well, I can't afford nearly as much, if you follow what I'm saying. So I'm afraid that real estate in general is kind of overpriced. And the other problem with real estate is it's the thing that is easiest and most liable to be taxed by the government. It's obvious, it can't be hidden. And it's something that only rich people have, or at least middle-class people. So that real estate's been very, very good to me in a lot of countries, but I'm not crazy about it anymore. So where are you going to run and hide at this point? Okay, it's really quite tough. This is why Richard Russell, some of your listeners may know who he is, or was, I should say, says that in a depression, everybody loses. The winner is just the person that loses the least. That's why they call it a depression, a period of time when most people's standard of living drops significantly. Okay, that's what we're going through right now. So what should you be doing? I'm telling you what you shouldn't do in danger areas. Well, I'm forced to the conclusion that if you want to preserve capital, even at what, $17.50 today or whatever it is, I'd say buying gold coins is the smartest way to save and put capital aside and just have it. It's money in its most basic form. It's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. And that's really important in an unstable world like today. So one thing is buy gold, secondarily, buy silver. Different investment entirely, but worthwhile considering in the same light. But I think that you have to try to be a speculator, which is not a good idea for most people. Most people equate that with gambling, or it turns into gambling for most people if they don't know what they're doing. But that's the world we live in. But let's say that when this thing is over, depending how stupid governments are, and there's a lot more stupid things they can do, let's say it's over in 10 years, 20 years, 20. It's most of the real wealth in the world will still be here, most of it, barring World War III. And it'll just change ownership. And hopefully the world will have more than 500 million people left.
Well, one would hope so. Doug, learn to speculate, save in gold and silver. I've been saying for a while now, save in gold and silver. There are those out there that would say it doesn't give me any sort of dividend. It doesn't help me pay the bills. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. It's okay for Doug to say that, but I can't even pay the mortgage at the moment. What would you say to those people? And they don't know how to speculate. They don't even know how to invest.
Yeah. Well, it's quite a problem, and it's not one that can be solved overnight. As far as not having current cash to pay current obligations, you know what you got to do? You've got to cut your standard of living voluntarily while you're still in charge. That means don't buy a Starbucks on the way to or from work, okay? And, brown bag your lunch instead of going out to a restaurant, and all kinds of things of that nature. Turn out your lights when you leave the room, little things like that. And gold doesn't pay an income. Yeah, but neither does a $100 bill pay an income. For something to pay an income, you've got to lend it out, whether it's that $100 bill, which by itself does not pay income, or the gold coin. You can lend it out and say, yeah, I'll lend you this gold coin for a year. Give me back an ounce and a tenth a year from now. Okay, now it earns income for you. That's how banking historically worked. All these problems are solved or can be solved. But the other thing I think people have to do is, if you're working one job now, well, you might not have time, but hey, here's something. Why not find a second job and work two jobs? Because I used to do that, incidentally, when I got out of college, which incidentally was an idiot move on my part. I would never have gone to college if I'd had proper counseling when I was in high school.
Why?
If anybody had just sat down and talked to me, I would have realized, you know what? It's costing me a huge amount of money. And I'm going to spend 4 years listening to blah, blah, that I can learn this stuff myself, which I have, incidentally. And I can do many more interesting things at a time of my life, which is kind of unique.
Yeah.
18 to 22 or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Where you can do things that you really can't do 10 years later, certainly not 20 years later. Well, forget about. So don't go to college. You should use that time and money productively. But yeah, I had two jobs. I worked two jobs. It was hard, you know. It was very hard and inconvenient. But if you don't have capital, you got to put some together. And how are you gonna put it together? Well, that's how you do it, by working hard and spending less for a period of time. Now you got some capital. Now you can become a capitalist, and now you can change. Okay, and I certainly have that way. That's what I suggest to others.
Right now, the gold stocks and the gold price have come off. And in fact, I think gold stocks have been especially badly smacked, whatever you want to say, both here and in the US. Do you think now is a really good time for gold stocks? Let's just talk that gold subject, if you like, for a moment, Doug, before we run out of time.
Okay.
What's your view on gold and silver? Silver has also gone below $20 an ounce. What's your view? Do you think now is a good time when everyone's not interested?
Well, first of all, you always want to be buying, ideally, theoretically, when everybody else is selling. It's like Warren Buffett said, you know, be afraid when others are bold, and be bold when others are afraid. And right now is a good time to be bold when it comes to the mining stocks. And I'll just quote a basic fact. The all-in sustaining costs for the gold mining industry as a whole right now is about $1,000 an ounce. That's the all-in sustaining cost, soup and nuts and everything, for the typical producing gold mine. Gold right now is selling for $1,750 an ounce. So it's an immensely profitable industry right now. The gold stocks are cheap, though, because fund managers, the last several generations of fund managers, have been educated to believe that gold is a pet rock. It doesn't produce anything. It's not money. It's a foible. It's a trinket. All kinds of nonsense. And also, gold mining is a dirty, yellow trucks in the mud type of industry. It's not ecological. It's not high tech. Well, it is kind of, but not in the way they want to. It's not an ESG type of business with, you know, environment, societal and governments, or a DEI. That's another catchphrase. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah, it's none of those things. So fund managers don't want to own gold mining companies, okay? Mutual funds don't want to own them. Brokers don't tout them to their customers. Well, some brokers in Australia and Canada do, of course, but so nobody. But it's a great business right now. It's coining money, and at some point soon, there's going to be a panic into gold mining stocks. It's going to happen. It happens to all kinds of things, and the timing is right. Now it's finally going to. So, what do I think is the best speculation right now? Gold mining stocks and uranium mining stocks. They're also in the toilet right now. And I tend to stay away from the exploration companies, or the development companies. I think you should buy the producers, frankly. Better safe than sorry at this stage in the market, because anything can happen.
Well, Doug Casey, final words to you. We've run out of time. I like to just sum up all this. You said earlier, learn to speculate, buy gold and silver. The lunatics are at the controls. Final word to you, to our wonderful community out there. And before he says his final word, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, Doug has written a number of books. There's a trilogy all about Charles Knight. I love this trilogy. I've read all of them. And one of them, of course, is called Speculator. So when he says learn to speculate, read Speculator that Doug wrote. They're great books, really good reads. I couldn't put mine down. And if you don't want to buy the book, you can get them on Audible so that when you're doing your running or walking along the beach, you can have a listen. They are well worth it. Doug, final word to you.
Oh, goodness, Carrie, anything that I would say at this point would be at risk of being rather anticlimactic. I've kind of said everything that was on my mind for the moment. But listen, if we talk again in 3 months or something like that,
yep,
the whole world could be turned upside down once again, or turned every which way but loose. So this is what we call an evolving situation.
Yeah, it's an evolving situation. So we'll definitely talk again in 3 months' time. Goodness knows where it is, but stay safe out there, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to what Doug is saying. Contrarian investing, potentially he likes the gold and the uranium stocks, very undervalued at the moment. Do your own research. This is not financial advice. As always, thanks for joining us here on Small Caps. Doug, great to see you.
Thanks, Gary.